For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the undisputed king of late night. Millions tuned in every evening to watch Hollywood's biggest stars sit on that iconic couch. But some nights, those stars weren't quite themselves. Some were flying higher than anyone in the audience realized. From slurred words to bizarre behavior. From substances hidden in plain sight to confessions that shocked America, these are the moments when Johnny Carson's guests were unmistakably, undeniably under the influence. And the cameras captured it all. Welcome to a side of The Tonight Show that NBC never wanted you to see, or at least never wanted you to understand. The 1960s, 70s, and 80s were a different era. Drug use in Hollywood wasn't just common, it was practically expected. Cocaine flowed at parties like champagne. Pills were handed out like candy. And marijuana. That was just the beginning. Johnny Carson himself was no stranger to the party scene, but he was a consummate professional who rarely let his guard down on camera. His guests, however, weren't always so careful. Tonight, we're examining 7 unforgettable appearances where celebrities showed up to The Tonight Show in altered states, some subtly, others spectacularly. We'll explore what they were on, how Johnny handled it, and what happened behind the scenes that the audience never knew. These aren't just stories of celebrity excess. They're windows into an era when the line between entertainment and disaster was terrifyingly thin, and everything was broadcast live to millions of Americans. Let's dim the lights and roll the tape. Number 1. George Carlin, the counterculture comics cocaine-fueled cowboy. George Carlin was already a comedy legend when he appeared on The Tonight Show in the late 1970s and early 1980s. But those who worked behind the scenes knew something audiences didn't. George was often flying on cocaine. During a particularly memorable 1982 appearance, Carlin was visibly wired, talking at machine gun speed, eyes darting, unable to sit still. His energy was electric but chaotic, his thoughts fragmenting mid-sentence before racing to the next topic. Johnny Carson, ever the professional, tried to keep up, but even he seemed concerned by George's intensity. What audiences never knew was that Carlin was in the grip of a cocaine addiction that would nearly destroy him. George later admitted in interviews that during this period of his career, he was using cocaine daily, sometimes hourly. He'd do lines before going on stage, during commercial breaks, even in the bathroom moments before walking onto Carson's set. I was a functional addict, Carlin said years later in his autobiography. I thought I was hilarious. Looking back at those tapes, I was just manic. Staff members from The Tonight Show recalled finding white powder residue in the green room after Carlin's visits. Some nights, his pupils were so dilated that makeup artists joked they looked like 2 black holes. But the truth was far more tragic than anyone imagined. George's cocaine use escalated until he suffered a heart attack in 1982, the same year as that frantic Carson appearance. He was only 44 years old. The heart attack forced him into sobriety and saved his life, but not before millions of viewers witnessed his spiral without understanding what they were seeing. Looking back at those episodes now, the signs are unmistakable. The constant sniffing, the grinding jaw, the paranoid edge beneath the humor. Johnny had hosted a man in crisis, and America had laughed along. Number 2. Foster Brooks. Wait, he was actually drunk. This one will surprise you. Foster Brooks built an entire career playing a lovable drunk. His slurred speech, stumbling walk, and confused ramblings made him a comedy icon and a frequent guest on The Tonight Show throughout the 1970s. But here's what almost nobody knew. Sometimes Foster Brooks wasn't acting. Brooks was a recovering alcoholic who'd quit drinking in 1964. But those close to the show revealed that on at least 2 occasions in the mid-1970s, Foster had fallen off the wagon before appearing with Johnny. The problem? His act was so convincing that no one could tell the difference. During a 1975 appearance, crew members backstage noticed Brooks was slurring even before he went into character. One stagehand later recalled, "We thought he was warming up for the bit, getting into character. Then someone got close enough to smell his breath. He'd been drinking for real." Johnny Carson apparently never knew. The interview went exactly as planned. Foster played the drunk. The audience roared with laughter, and no one suspected that the performance was partially authentic. The irony was devastating. Foster Brooks had created such a perfect illusion of inebriation that when he actually relapsed, it became invisible. He was hiding in plain sight, his real struggle camouflaged by the character that made him famous. Years later, Brooks returned to sobriety and remained sober until his death in 2001. But those who knew the truth about those particular Carson appearances never forgot the uncomfortable realization they'd been laughing at a man's genuine suffering. Sometimes the saddest stories wear the mask of comedy. Number 3. Richard Pryor, freebasing. Before the fire, Richard Pryor was arguably the greatest comedian of his generation, and his appearances on The Tonight Show were always unpredictable. But in 1980, during one of his final appearances before the incident that would nearly kill him, Richard was high on cocaine specifically. FREBASING. The June 9, 1980 appearance is haunting to watch now. Knowing what would happen less than 2 weeks later, Pryor was energetic but erratic, his stories trailing off, his laughter too loud and too long. Johnny seemed charmed but also slightly wary, as if sensing something was off but unable to pinpoint exactly what. Richard's eyes had that telltale glassiness. He touched his nose repeatedly. His breathing seemed shallow and rapid. What audiences never knew was that Richard Pryor was already deep into the addiction that would soon consume him literally. On June 9, 1980, just days after that Carson appearance, Richard Pryor set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine. He suffered third-degree burns over more than half his body. He ran down his Los Angeles street engulfed in flames, screaming for help. He barely survived. Later, after his recovery, Pryor would joke about the incident in his stand-up, but friends revealed the horror of what happened. The freebasing accident wasn't just a tragedy. It was the culmination of months of escalating drug use that had started to show on television. Watching that final pre-fire Carson appearance now feels like watching a man on the edge of an abyss, entertaining millions while secretly spiraling toward catastrophe. Johnny welcomed him back months later, after Richard had recovered from his burns. They never discussed the fire's true cause on air. Some truths were too dark even for late-night television, but the truth was far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Number 4. Andy Kaufman, the milk and cookies that weren't quite innocent. Andy Kaufman was famous for his bizarre behavior, which made it nearly impossible to tell when he was performing and when he was actually impaired. But insiders from The Tonight Show revealed that during at least one appearance in 1977, Andy's strangeness had a pharmaceutical assist. Kaufman arrived carrying a glass of milk and a plate of cookies, props for his childlike persona. He read from a children's book in a meandering, sleepy voice that seemed like typical Andy weirdness. But what audiences never knew was that the milk wasn't just milk. According to Bob Smuda, Kaufman's close friend and collaborator, Andy sometimes spiked his props with Quaaludes, a popular sedative in the 1970s that produced a dreamy, disconnected high. During that particular Carson appearance, Andy's speech was slower than usual, his reactions delayed. He seemed to be falling asleep mid-sentence. The audience laughed, assuming it was part of the act. Johnny Carson looked genuinely confused, unsure whether to play along or express concern. The truth came out years later when Smuda published his memoir. He wrote, Andy loved the blurred line between performance and reality. Sometimes he'd take a lewd before going on Carson because it made the weirdness more authentic. He wanted to be genuinely out of it. The performance wasn't an act, it was enhanced reality. Kaufman died in 1984 from lung cancer at age 35. But his legacy remains one of comedy's greatest mysteries. How much was performance? How much was pharmaceutical experimentation? How much was genuine mental unraveling? Those Carson appearances provide clues, but like everything with Andy Kaufman, the truth remained deliberately obscured. He wanted audiences to wonder. He wanted to keep everyone guessing. And he succeeded. Number 5. Robin Williams. Cocaine's impact on comic genius. Robin Williams was a supernova of comedic energy, and his appearances on The Tonight Show in the late 1970s and early 1980s were legendary. Rapid-fire improvisations, character voices, physical comedy that left audiences breathless. But much of that superhuman energy came from cocaine. Williams himself later admitted that during his rise to fame from Mork and Mindy through his early film career, he was using cocaine regularly. The drug amplified his already manic energy into something that seemed almost supernatural. During a 1979 Carson appearance, Robin barely sat down. He bounced around the set, doing voices, riffing on everything Johnny said, creating characters spontaneously. It was brilliant and exhausting to watch. Johnny Carson, himself no stranger to the party scene, later told friends he'd never seen anyone with that much energy. It was like trying to interview lightning, he said. But what audiences never knew was the toll that cocaine was taking on Williams's body and soul. Crew members from the The Tonight Show recalled Robin being sweaty, jittery, and unable to stop moving during commercial breaks. One makeup artist noticed his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold a glass of water. The cocaine use continued until 1982, when Williams's close friend John Belushi died from a cocaine and heroin overdose. Robin had been with Belushi earlier that evening, partying at the Chateau Marmont. Belushi's death devastated Williams and shocked him into sobriety just in time for the birth of his son. Looking back at those early Carson appearances, it's impossible not to see the signs. The dilated pupils, the constant sniffing, the jaw grinding, the inability to focus on a single thought for more than seconds. The truth was far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Robin Williams got clean, but the demons never fully left. His tragic suicide in 2014 reminded the world that even the funniest people can carry unbearable pain. Those Carson appearances captured him at the peak of his cocaine-fueled energy, brilliant and broken at the same time. Number 6. Dean Martin. The act that became reality like Foster Brooks. Dean Martin built a career playing the charming drunk. His boozy persona was central to his Rat Pack image and his variety show. On The Tonight Show, Dino would stumble out with a rocks glass in hand, slurring his words and pretending to mistake Johnny for Frank Sinatra. Everyone assumed it was an act. It wasn't always. Dean Martin did drink, and while he often exaggerated his intoxication for comedy, multiple Tonight Show staff members confirmed there were episodes where Dean showed up genuinely drunk. A production assistant from the show later revealed, "You could usually tell the difference. When he was acting drunk, he was in control. The slurs were precise, the stumbles were choreographed, but sometimes his eyes were unfocused, his timing was off, and Johnny had to work harder to keep the interview on track." During a 1972 appearance, Martin's speech was noticeably slurred in a way that seemed less controlled than usual. He forgot Carson's questions mid-answer and kept repeating the same anecdote about Frank Sinatra. Johnny, ever the professional, gently redirected him, but there was concern in his eyes. The truth was far more complicated than anyone imagined. Dean Martin's drinking increased after the death of his son Dean Paul Martin. In a plane crash in 1987, he withdrew from public life, and those who knew him said the charming drunk persona had become less performance and more reality. He died on Christmas Day 1995, at age 78. His liver had finally given out. Those earlier Carson appearances, when the line between act and reality blurred, now seem like warnings no one heeded. We were too busy laughing at the performance to notice the pain underneath. 7. Grace Slick, the rock star who brought acid to Prime. Grace Slick, the psychedelic rock goddess from Jefferson Airplane, appeared on The Tonight Show in 1968, and it remains one of the most bizarrely memorable musical performances in the show's history. Grace was high on LSD and she made no attempt to hide it, wearing a black leather outfit and dark sunglasses despite the studio lights. Grace giggled uncontrollably through Johnny's questions, gave answers that made no logical sense, and seemed to be seeing things that weren't there. When it came time to perform, Jefferson Airplane launched into White Rabbit, a song explicitly about drug use, while Grace swayed and sang with eyes half closed. Lost in her own psychedelic experience, Johnny Carson looked completely baffled, unsure whether to be amused or alarmed. But what audiences never knew was that Grace Slick considered it a political statement. In later interviews, Grace explained that she'd taken LSD specifically to challenge the establishment. "I wanted to bring the counterculture into America's living rooms," she said. "I wanted to show them that you could be high and it wasn't the end of the world." The performance was controversial. NBC received complaints. Some affiliates refused to air the episode. But Grace Slick didn't care. She'd made her point. The revolution would be televised, whether middle America was ready or not. Johnny never invited her back. The truth was far more radical than anyone imagined. That single appearance captured the collision between the establishment and the counterculture, between Johnny Carson's Midwestern professionalism and the psychedelic chaos of the 1960s. It was uncomfortable, strange, and utterly authentic, a rock star refusing to play by the rules, even on television's biggest stage. For 30 years, Johnny Carson's couch hosted thousands of guests, some brilliant, some troubled, and some who were both simultaneously. These 7 appearances remind us that fame and substance abuse have always been tragically intertwined. The pressures of celebrity, the availability of drugs, and the permissive culture of Hollywood created a perfect storm that claimed many lives. and damaged countless others. But what makes these moments particularly haunting is their public nature. These weren't private struggles. These were people high on national television. Their altered states broadcast to millions, preserved forever on tape for future generations to analyze and judge. Johnny Carson handled these situations with grace, professionalism, and compassion. He knew that many of his guests were battling demons, and he rarely called them out or embarrassed them. He understood that show business exacted a terrible price from those who lived in its spotlight. Some of these stars got clean like George Carlin, Foster Brooks, and Robin Williams. Others, like Dean Martin and Richard Pryor, struggled until the end. Andy Kaufman remains an enigma. Grace Slick survived the 1960s when so many others didn't. Their stories remind us that the people we watch on television are human beings, fragile, struggling, and sometimes high. Behind the laughter and the performances were real people fighting real battles. Some won, some lost. All of them deserved more compassion than they sometimes received. These weren't just high guests, they were talented artists in pain, entertaining us even as they suffered. Which of these stories surprised you most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this look into Hollywood's hidden history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from the golden era.